Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. As it's Valentine's Day this week, I was thinking of covering the 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre for this week's video. This is a well-known crime in which 7 members of Chicago's North Side gang were lined up and shot dead by 4 assailants. Whilst the perpetrators have never been definitively identified, it has long been suspected that these murders link back to Al Capone. However, as I began researching this crime, another equally horrifying but less well-known crime came to light. Similarly horrific in the level of violence involved, this crime is all the more shocking due to the random selection of the victims. The Hollinsburg Massacre in Indiana took place in the early hours of Valentine's Day 1977 on the 48th anniversary of the Chicago crime. Whilst there is no direct link between the two crimes, it could be wondered whether the famous events of nearly half a century earlier had played into the twisted minds of the perpetrators. In a remote area of northern Park County in Indiana, Betty Jane Spencer was at home with her 22-year-old son, Gregory, and 2 of her stepsons, 16-year-old Reeve and 14-year-old Ralph. Betty's husband, Keith, was at work at an Indianapolis television station about 50 miles away. Just after midnight on the morning of the 14th of February, 4 armed intruders forced themselves into Betty's mobile home. They ordered Betty and her sons to lie face down on the living room floor, their hands tied behind their backs. It was at this point that 17-year-old Raymond Spencer returned home from his job at the Raccoon Lake restaurant. He was unaware of what was going on inside his home. As he went inside, he too was ordered to lay face down on the floor. The 5 family members remained in that position whilst the 4 men searched through their home looking for anything of value. One of the intruders was 23-year-old Roger Drollinger. Earlier that day, Roger had met with his attorney in a Crawfordsville motel to discuss his ongoing trial in Montgomery County on drug-related charges. He was fully expecting to be sent to prison the following day as a result of this case. He had decided that he wanted to use his last night of freedom to do something a bit different. Roger was the oldest and de facto leader of the group. The other members were 20-year-old Daniel Stonebreaker, 21-year-old Michael Wright, and David Smith, who was 17. That day, the 4 men had been riding around in Roger's truck when he told them that he wanted to stop somewhere to kill some people for no purpose, just for enjoyment. At one point he stopped the truck, got out and shot a German Shepherd dog to show them how easy it was to kill a person. He had 3 shotguns and a .38 caliber revolver in his truck at that time. Roger had decided to use his last night of freedom to commit a thrill killing whilst he still had the opportunity to do so. He had no reason for doing this other than his desire to know what it felt like to take a person's life. The men transferred the weapons into a car which one of them had rented the previous week. They then began to drive around at random looking for a place in which to commit robbery and murder. After approximately 1 hour, they came upon the Spencer home. Relatively isolated, the nearest neighbour was a quarter of a mile away, and with several relatively new cars in the driveway, Roger decided that this was the perfect location. He then drove the car onto a side road, and the group began to ready themselves for entry into the home. Roger passed out a pair of gloves to each of the others. Earlier he had fully loaded and checked the weapons, and on the Saturday before the killings, he sawed the barrel off of each of the shotguns. Roger began to talk about killing the occupants of the trailer and how to search the premises and subdue the people inside. He went on to suggest that the 4 men made a pact that each of them would be involved in shooting the occupants, and if they backed out, they themselves would be shot by the other participants. David began tying a handkerchief around his face, but Roger told him that this was not necessary. No one was going to be left alive to identify them. As they waited outside of the home, they saw Keith Spencer leave for work. They then cut the phone lines and went inside. Once inside, the four men forced Betty and her four sons to lie down side by side on the living room floor. Roger and Michael then searched the home for money and guns, while Daniel and David guarded the family. Roger then asked the family which of their cars had the most petrol in, and then got the keys and went outside. He moved that car and the car in which they had arrived to the end of the driveway, facing the road. He then proceeded to puncture the tyres of the remaining vehicles. Roger went back inside the home, where the others were waiting for his next instruction. Daniel, David and Michael were each holding one of the shotguns, and Roger was carrying the .38 caliber pistol. The men proceeded to taunt and threaten the family for up to an hour before Roger gave the signal, and the other three men began shooting each of the victims in the head or upper body at close range. Gregory raised his head up and screamed, "Don't shoot me anymore." Upon hearing this, Roger took David's shotgun, grabbed Gregory by the hair, held the gun so that the barrel was approximately 6 inches from the back of his head, and fired again. Roger kicked each of the victims to make sure that they were dead. Concluding that Betty was still alive, Roger ordered Daniel to shoot her again. Daniel fired, and the four gunmen fled the scene, 2 in their car and 2 in the car belonging to the Spencer family. Unknown to them, the final shot fired blew Betty's wig off, leading the men to believe that they had shot off part of her head. In reality, it had only grazed her head, and she was still alive. She was critically injured from the gunshots that she had endured, but managed to check on her son and stepsons. They were all dead. Frantic, Betty managed to drag herself to her neighbour's house. The neighbour, Harold Eskew, telephoned for help. Betty kept saying to him that her 4 boys were all dead and that she had been shot in the back, asking him to keep talking to her for fear that she would pass out. She was rushed to the hospital and placed under armed guard while she was treated for her injuries. A manhunt was underway. It did not take long for the police to identify who was responsible for the murders, and warrants were issued for their arrest. At the beginning of March, Daniel was the first to be apprehended. It was believed the others had fled the state, and the FBI were brought in to assist with the search. Daniel had told the police that he, Roger, David and Michael were responsible for the murders, and had shown officials where the murder weapons were hidden. 3 days after Daniel's arrest, Michael was arrested in San Jose, California. As the search for Roger and David intensified, the fugitives made front-page news across the country. At one point it was believed that they were in Florida, but they successfully evaded apprehension. It would be another couple of weeks before David was arrested at a Holiday Inn in Kentucky. Then, on the 11th of April, Roger surrendered to the FBI at the offices of his attorney in Indianapolis. He was with his wife, 17-year-old Kathy, and their 3-year-old daughter, Amy, at the time, and spoke to reporters about the murders, stating, "There is no way I was close to that. There is no way I murdered anybody. I have a wife and a child, and there is no way I would have taken the life of anybody else's children." He went on to claim that on the night of the murders, he was with his wife and David at a laundromat in Waynetown. He then said he went to visit his parents and his lawyer before going home to bed at around 10:30 p.m. When he was asked if he believed that Daniel and Michael were involved in the murders, he said, "They're crazy, they're nuts, they scare me." And when asked if he believed that Daniel may have implicated him in the murders, he replied that he had done it before. All 4 men would be tried separately. Roger's case went to court first. Both Daniel and Michael testified against him. Michael stated that the murders were just for enjoyment, and the plan was to shoot the people, take their blood, and write "Helter Skelter" on the walls and refrigerator. Helter Skelter had been found written in blood on the walls of the Sharon Tate home in Los Angeles after the murders of 5 people in 1969, and Michael went on to claim that Roger was somewhat in awe of Charles Manson. Betty was able to identify her attackers and testify against Roger at trial. She identified Roger as the man with the authoritative and commanding voice who gave the orders that started the murders. She was forced to relive the events of that night, stating that there was some clicking noises behind us, and suddenly there was a shot fired from behind Greg. I heard this horrible noise, and I realised it was blood rushing from our boys. I don't know how to describe it, almost like a waterfall. Roger testified on his own behalf at his trial. For nearly 2.5 hours he spoke calmly, proclaiming his complete innocence. His wife Kathy and his father Nathan also testified that he was at home in bed at the time of the murders. It took the jury only 50 minutes to find Roger guilty on all counts, and he was subsequently sentenced to 4 life sentences, which would be served concurrently. He unsuccessfully appealed his conviction in 1980 and attempted to escape from prison in March 1981 and January 1983. He remained incarcerated at the maximum security Wabash Valley Correctional Facility until he died in his prison cell in January 2014. Off the back of Roger's trial, David's trial began in October 1977, with Betty once again being the main witness for the prosecution and having to go through the ordeal of a trial for a second time. David pleaded innocent by reason of insanity. At trial it was stated how David idolised Roger and had been living with him directly before the murders. David's attorneys claimed that he was under Roger's spell and would do anything that Roger asked of him. However, the testimony of several psychiatrists did not support the defence's argument that he was legally insane at the time of the killings. The jury did not believe this either, and David was found guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder and received 4 life sentences. On the 7th of November, Michael waived his right to a trial and changed his plea to guilty. Whilst he had been charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, he accepted a plea bargain that reduced 3 of those charges to second-degree murder. He received 2 life sentences for the deaths of Reeve and Raymond. He also received a pair of concurrent 15 to 25-year sentences in the deaths of Gregory and Ralph. The following month, Daniel also pleaded guilty with a plea bargain on the same terms. Daniel, David and Michael continued to serve their life sentences at the Pendleton Correctional Facility near Indianapolis. After the murder of her sons, Betty became a vocal victims' rights activist and proponent for tighter prison sentences. She received numerous state, national and international awards for her work with victims of crime. Until her death in 2004, she and her stepson's biological mother, Carolyn Spencer, campaigned together against every parole opportunity given to the gang members. Thanks for listening to today's case. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and click the bell icon for all notifications. Okay, all my petty crimers, where it's time to see the subscribers' pets. Today we have 2 petty crimes from adjoining states to Indiana. First up we have Nancy from Michigan, and she has sent in her red poodle, Winston. Nancy tells me he's guilty of public indecency because he tries to get intimate with Lizzie, his sister. Also living in Nancy's house there are 3 cats. They are Millie, Cassie and Phoebe. They've lived outside a lot and now they are under house arrest at Nancy's home. Then, moving across to Illinois, a place called Gurney, and Anna has sent in her dogs for petty crime. Honey is a 6-year-old American Staffordshire Terrier. and Jules is a 1-year-old Boston Terrier. They are best friends and they tend to commit their crimes together. Although Jules is smaller, she's known to steal bones and toys from her big sister Honey. They both have a lengthy rap sheet of releasing pungent gas fumes that sometimes leave their owners feeling sick. Due to their charm and ability to manipulate the justice system with their cuteness, they typically end up getting off with just a warning. So that's this week's Petty Crime. Thanks again to Nancy and Anna for sending in their criminals to us. Thanks very much for listening to the Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. Mike McCarty, who is a police officer's son from Indiana, has written a book about this case called Choking in Fear, a memoir about the Hollandsburg murders. Goodbye.